Paul has a few of people who had sent in statements to be read. And then after some of the prepared or statements, we'll just open it up to see what other people obviously are in this room were friends with Hal and had a sense of his work and share those insights as well. So, but Craig Thorpe.
I'll take a doctorate.
So just very quickly, Hal mentioned Craig Thorpe a number of times in the presentation in terms of his work that he outlined that Craig has done in working as doing the illuminating these projects. So
great. Well, thank you.
Yes.
Well, it's good to be here with you all tonight and to remember Hal as a colleague and for many of us as a personal friend. And he was both for me. Been together countless times over these years. I don't remember exactly where Hal and I first met, but it was certainly within the organization of All Aboard Washington, the rail advocacy group for Washington State, which is connected to other such organizations around the country, particularly the West. So Hal had connections collegially with folks in California and Oregon and Montana and elsewhere. So our paths crossed in that regard. Hal had this, as you all know, this great vision. And he glommed onto my skills and interest as a rail artist, and he said, we need what you have. Yeah, as a rail artist I've done and I do a lot of historical rail art, but Hal really saw the merit of the kind of art that told a story about what yet could be. It isn't, but it could be. And that was part of this vision casting that he was so good at. And I developed this style, this adaptation really of architectural renderings. You know, a rendering generally, whether it's digital or hand-drawn, is showing what does not yet exist. So I took that form and applied it to the rail world, and over the decade and a half that Hal and I did work together, he was probably the greatest user or commissioner of my style, because he knew that image would tell a story. Image would go from the eye to the heart, and decisions are made in the heart, not just left brain. So how could connect that? You know, I mused many times when I look at his maps, like we've seen here, and I'd see that's sort of like just within the person. Hal had this map of the eye to the heart to the hand to action, and it puts it all together. One little story to show you how effective his vision through art was. One of the pieces that he commissioned for me was an adaptation of a current Norfolk Southern Railway corridor in Virginia. Hal commissioned this for the folks in the Virginia area who wanted to work with the Norfolk Southern and develop a multi-corridor, high-speed, higher speed rail line that would serve freight and passenger needs. So I did the painting, shipped it off to Virginia. Clients loved it. They unveiled it at a meeting where there were several folks from the Norfolk Southern in attendance. And the Norfolk Southern rep had two series of comments. The first was he was quite upset that I painted the locomotive with the Norfolk Southern logo on it, because that wasn't their idea, and they hadn't blessed it with their graces, so he really wanted the locomotive colors changed. No problem, I can do that, and I did. But the second thing was very telling. He looked at the painting, this is the Norfolk Southern chap, and he kind of harumphed with the idea, if this keeps up, it will be nothing less than the passengerization of the industry. Now, you don't laugh right away. That's a joke. If you were in rail circles like Hal was, he would, and he did, he just burst out laughing. And when he told it to me, I did too. Because the Norfolk Southern fellow was offended. They did not want their corridor to be used for this kind of expansive passenger and freight development. So the rendering, which was Hal's idea, went right to that guy's heart. See? And it sort of even bypassed his left brain. Bypassed logic and went right to the heart. And he had a visceral reaction. I don't want that because it's going to be a threat to me. So I tell that story in rail circles when I use it. People just disintegrate into laughter. They get it right away. This is where art and image casts a vision and moves it. And Hal, as a good friend, was able to engage my mind and my heart and my hand. And it is a joy to have known and worked with him. Still have been keeping in touch with his wife, Carol. And I know that you all share your stories. So you have the opportunities to share those now. But thank you very much. And indeed, it's great to have been a colleague of Hal Cooper's. Thank you. Okay. Want to ask after?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Al Runty, and I come to railroads as a historian. My specialty is the national parks, and I've written several books and articles about the development of our national park system by railroads. And the reason that Hal and I became so close is because, for one thing, we share a favorite restaurant. Do you know the restaurant I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The Wedgwood Broiler. Okay.
Yeah.
So every once in a while I would get a call from Hal, and he would say, Al, would you like to have lunch at the Wedgwood Broiler? And of course that meant an investment of at least 2.5 hours at least. Because Hal would like to have soup and salad and a sandwich and a dessert, maybe 2 desserts. And we'd sit there and we'd talk. And the one thing we always talked about, you could always count on talking about, was Craig Thorpe's art, whom we deeply admire, and he is the cover of my 2 major books on railroads, and how visionless and rudderless our country is when it comes to the things that matter. And passenger rail and freight rail matter. And yet every time we talk about it, we can't get past the word high speed. We can't get past, we're going to have this, you know, we're going to go whoosh, we're going to go swoosh. We haven't even learned to crawl yet. It takes 3 weeks, an average of 3 weeks, to get a normal freight car across this country today. Container trains, 4 or 5 days because they don't get broken up. But it takes an average of 3 weeks. And then we wonder why the trucking industry and the highway lobby run this country and not the vision such as you have been seeing and enjoying here. So the last conversation at the Wedgwood Broiler that I had with Hal, I think Craig was there. I think you were there with us. I think you'd gone to the bathroom. I don't think you were there to hear him commiserate about high-speed rail in California. And of course, it won't work unless we take Hal's vision, which is to tunnel the Tehachapies. If you tunnel the Tehachapies, you could go Los Angeles to San Francisco in 3.5 hours. That would really be high speed. 480 miles, you could do it in 3.5 hours. But the way that Jerry Brown and now Governor Newsom want to do it You've got to go over the Tehachapi's the same old way you've been doing it for 150 years. Up and down and around and in and out and down the other side. 6 hours. Well, wait a minute. I can fly in an hour. And that's, you know, an hour and change. And that was the last conversation that we had after what was, I think, a 4 or 5 course lunch. But what I will miss about Hal is that outspokenness that came with real competence, real vision, real ideas. This was a real idea person. And I can just imagine all the conferences where he really raised eyebrows and turned heads because of his willingness to speak to a vision of the future that so few people dare to imagine. So I'm sure that Hal's in a good place. I'm a big believer that we don't quit this earthly plane. Well, we quit this, but we go to something else. And so I can only hope that if there is a high-speed rail system in heaven, that Hal has been put in charge of it. Because it'll get done. But if we put California in charge of it, nah, it won't be done. So anyway, thanks again for your beautiful words, Craig. They were very close, by the way, and you can see that Hal's vision was beautifully represented by Craig, and it was fun. I'm going to miss him terribly, but at the same time, I know he's in a good place, and the trains run on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Actually, as you spoke, I now can recall those discussions that Hal would refer to in his with you. So it's fun to put a face to it. So I appreciate your comments. I think what we'll do next, and you guys feel free to leave if you need to. There was a brief mention of Hal at a recent conference we had in Germany. Marcia married Baker, who had Hal to her place in Virginia in the early 90s after we had met Hal, or after the LaRouche organization had met Hal. He was there beginning the process of outlining this Eurasian land bridge, the New Silk Road conception. And so Marcia has known Hal since that time. So she brought up his passing, and I thought just relevant that Ms. Helga LaRouche had a few comments to say on Hal's passing and her memories of Hal. So perhaps we'll play that now, and then we have a few other presentations from here in the room. So.
Thank you. My name is Marcia Mary Baker. I'm so glad and grateful to be here from the United States. So to Helga and the panelists and the moderator, Diane, I need to make just a very short mention about someone who isn't here. And if there's a question, maybe especially Diane, who worked with him last, if not Helga might say something. But that person is Hal Cooper. Dr. Hal B.H. Cooper would love to be here from Seattle, Washington. He passed away in October 25. And I say that because many in the room know him personally or by his work. And so the video we saw earlier today from Lynn saying, what are you going to do about the billions who follow you? Hal did something, I think. I understand Helga, though, was he was a transportation engineer from the United States, very American, trained in Texas and California and Iowa. And I understand in the early 1990s, Helga and Lynn had an associate at a transportation conference in London, and Hal was met. And Hal had a natural interest in the New Silk Road and did a world map for the 1996 Eurasian Land Bridge report. Well, fast forward to today, 25 years later, and Hal was so thrilled to map everything, the Bering Strait, Africa, South America, a new Panama Canal, you would phone Hal and say, I'm interested in the Strait of Hormuz, and you would have 6 maps of the connection to the new Silk Road. I'm sure he would love to hear this. Music, he was not in the chorus, but when, Helga, you always talk about, we should respond to the spirit of the new Silk Road. I think Hal responded to the logistics of the new Silk Road. So you'll see his work in all these languages and these reports here. And Diane, I think you were the last to work with him. In ill health, he came to New York because the infrastructure is collapsing there along with the social condition you described.
Thanks. Yeah, he was wonderful. I'll say a little about Hal, and I don't know if you want to say also. What was amazing about Hal, as Marcia described, he would come up and I became aware of, or acutely aware, I should say, of the collapsing state of the New York public transportation system. Actually, during that 2016, the concerts, and actually 2017, when we had the centennial anniversary of Sylvia Lee's birth, because we had this huge chorus of 210 people, and we were joined by different church choruses, and people kept showing up late at the rehearsals. And the reason they were late was the subway caught on fire, or the train shut down, or it flooded, or, I mean, a complete breakdown. And Lynn said we should create a committee to investigate the collapse of the transportation in the New York metropolitan area. So of course we called Hal Cooper, who came out and he met with some of us and people from the MTA, the Metropolitan Transit Authority, and he spoke at a conference. And the thing that I found the most remarkable about him is, as we all know at these conferences, we're supposed to stay within certain limits of how long you're supposed to speak. And Hal would send to the AV people about 7,000 slides. And you would say, this is impossible. How can he show, I mean, maybe it was 100 or 200 slides in a 15-minute speech. And is he really going to do this? And he was so organized in his thinking, and he had the entire world, like Lynn, it was the entire world, every detail, every mountain, everything was in his mind. And he would give his speech in 15 minutes and show you 200 slides, and it was completely amazing. And it really was an enormous privilege to work with him. He also, every time he spoke, expressed his great gratitude for Lyndon LaRouche and spoke of Lynn and Helga as the originators of the World Landbridge and the Silk Road and so on. So it's definitely a terrible loss, but we are going to succeed in doing what he and Lynn and Helga have envisioned.
Yeah, I think that if the history of how the New Silk Road, World Landbridge came into being will ever be written by some historians, Hal Cooper will have a very prominent name in that, because what Diane just said, you know, he was passionate about making maps, making concrete suggestions, you know, for African industrialization, for, you know, we had several meetings which were not even published, you know, where Lynn and I and he would have meetings with experts from different countries where he would provide maps. And these were not even mentioned, you know, because these were private meetings. But if you look at how ideas become realized, it takes passion, you know. So I think I want to give a big tribute to Hal Cooper, who, you know, for his work already has become an immortal person.
So yeah, I would just say, just also in reflection of that, also what Al had mentioned on Hal being outspoken, but also from a very principled standpoint was truly political and would work with everybody across the political spectrum, you know. And it wasn't, it was always from the standpoint of, could he connect with this person on a shared vision of the actual development of the physical economy for the world or whatever region the dialogue may have been happening. But I think he really approached his political views and relationships from an absolutely principled standpoint. But as I think Diane had mentioned that she thought that Hal had met us in 1991 at a transportation conference, us as in the Schiller Institute, the LaRouche movement. But apparently Hal had sent in a letter. Hunter, maybe you know something about it. I don't know if you want to say something about it, but after seeing the first woman on Mars, which was a part of Lyndon LaRouche's presidential campaign in 1986, or was it the 88 election? 88 election, yeah. The actual video was, I think, done in 86 maybe. Anyway, so this was a half-hour presidential spot that all the candidates would get, national televised, show, to which Mr. LaRouche put together a concept of what a mission to Mars would actually look like, which was at the time, it's funny to watch it now, it sort of looks antiquated, but at the time this was cutting edge technology of showing these space vehicles and just laying out the perspective that's actually on the table now with the Artemis project and so on. But there was a huge response nationally to this program. I know people in this room who saw letters come in from 10-year-olds who say, I wanted to be that first person on Mars, which of course was actually a woman, as Lynn had developed the program. But apparently Hal actually sent in a letter about that. Was that right, Hunter?
Yeah, we got all these letters, and Tony and I were looking at these letters and looking up phone numbers of people who'd written in, and here was this one from Hal B.H. Cooper. I happened to get this letter, and I looked up the number and called him. As far as I know, that was our first contact with him. That was 1988.
Wow.
Unfortunately, we didn't save the letter.
What's that?
Unfortunately, we didn't save the letter.
But yeah, as I say, Hal, I think, again, approached his political life from a very principled standpoint. And as I think Al had said, the metric that Hal had was this vision of where humanity had to be. So, okay, great, yeah, sure. Thanks for coming very much. It was very appreciated.
He has family in from all over the country. We're going to airports.
Oh, okay.
So thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Yeah. What's that? Yeah, why don't we do that, and we'll give Thomas a bit of time to, well, not much time to prepare for to give the next round of it. Now, do you want your video clip?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me pull that up. In the meantime, Sarah, don't know, I forgot which piece you're performing, so maybe you can.
I'll introduce it, yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to be singing a piece with Sylvester accompanying me by Franz Schubert. It's a litany for all souls who have parted. And I'd just like to read in English what I will be singing in German. So, all souls rest in peace, who have had done with anxious torment, who have had done with a sweet dream, who sated with life hardly born, have departed from this world. All souls rest in peace. Those who only sought for comradeship here, who more often wept but never fled when no one was there to press their faithful hand with an understanding look. All who have parted from here, all souls rest in peace.
Okay, so Thomas Fuller has been a longtime friend of Lyndon and Helga LaRouche, and probably will give us a better sense of his relationship also to Hal, which I understand extends for some time. So would you want this played first, or
No,
just,
I'm gonna give it the
okay,
background
okay,
first.
okay. So
Play
just,
this.
if you need help, I'll
Okay.
set up.
So, Hal and I go back a little ways. And it started with a conversation. Hal helped me to fulfill an ambition that was kind of stoked in me, because I have been involved with Africa, particularly the Congo and other countries in Africa for quite some time, over 30 years now. And so one time at a conference in Virginia, we had the opportunity, just after we started the youth, the recruiting the youth movement, and myself with some of the youth were in a room that Len was addressing, Len and Helga. And I had an opportunity to ask Len to contextualize his vision of mobilizations in Africa at that particular time. And Len told me that, paraphrasing, that he believed that any energies and efforts at Africa at that time were strategic and opportune. And so I took that to heart, and I had known Hal, and at that time, Hal and I, our lives kind of converged, in which I was able to engage him in initiating various projects that we engaged in. And in 2010, Hal and I traveled to a conference in Germany, Berlin, and we were able to address, Hal addressed the large, broader conference, and Hal and myself had the pleasure of addressing the youth. And we were able to address them for quite some time, it'd be a whole afternoon. And we discussed issues pertaining to the youth movement in the United States, and then also in the broader sense to Africa, and what could be done. We introduced first-hand conditions. I've recently come back from there. And I also had relationships with people who were involved in political parties that at that time were advancing in the government. One of them was the former Prime Minister of the Palu Party, Mr. Mozito. So Hal and I began to conceptualize what we call the AWAPA, the Africa Water and Power Alliance. And so we got together, and he put together his vast knowledge of, he went into the books, and we put together some programs for Africa. And at that particular time, it was a very strategic time in terms of the Sudan problem and other issues in Africa. And Helga had asked Hal to present some of the materials that we had prepared, some of the reports that we had prepared as an intervention in conflicts as an alternative of development for Africa over war. And so we did so. I'm proud to say that, and I'm going to show us a small video to just kind of give a sampling of some of the things that we did, but I also wanted to talk about two major initiatives that are reflected in this small video. One of them was the initiative that highlighted the nexus between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and South Africa as an economic sphere that could actually lift this total of the sub-Saharan Africa out of the poverty that they're currently experiencing. And at that time, as many of you will recall, Africa had probably the greatest military conflagration that it has existed since modern time till now, in which President Kabila and many of the African nations confronted one another. And so it was, so after the conflict had calmed down, there was the issue of the child soldiers. The problem of a bunch of armed young people that were going to be demobilized and introduced into a non-economy. And so Hal and I developed a report and a program that was going to address this issue utilizing the civilian conservative, the CCC of the United States, which, as many of you know now, that was the foundation of a lot of our national parks and other environmental initiatives and institutions that were developed as a result of it. And so we addressed this issue with the focus of having this tried and proven methodology introduced into Africa, that conflagration. Unfortunately, even though we did introduce it to the Office of the Presidency and the DRC, the British Empire, the oligarchs, ended up demobilizing them with about $20 worth, toothbrush, comb, some other items, and sent them all into the country. And so I have a number of reports that were written by Hal and myself, and so I would just like to share a couple of them before I conclude my remarks. So, as was mentioned before, Hal's point of view was that, I forget how it was described, practical. That a lot of the approaches that the organization had were not very practical. And one of the things that he expressed to me was, and I share this point of view, that the fund that we could have implemented more business type revenue generating capabilities based upon the resources that the organization and he had. And so that's kind of reflected in some of the materials that we put together with an intention of selling some of those reports and what have you to generate revenues to be able to sustain ourselves, because as we know, this economy is not as good as we like it. And so, but Hal and I, we met quite frequently, and as those of you who know Hal, you really love to eat. Our famous restaurant in Tacoma, Washington was the Southern Kitchen, and I know a lot of times people would call Hal, and while we were dining together, we would spend a great deal of time, and he'd say, yes, I'm here with the great Thomas Fuller, and we're here at the Southern Kitchen, and but we're going to miss Hal dearly, and I would like to say that to show you how a vision can develop and come to fruition. Just last year, the African Union had commissioned a tender for the construction of the Congo Bridge. And so the bridge will begin construction in another couple of months. So I was introduced to Craig Thorpe also because Craig does beautiful work, and Hal introduced me to Craig, and we went to his home and we discussed what we were looking for. And so Hal's art is featured prominently in the reports that we did, and it created a vision. And I was able to introduce these reports through the presidency of the Mr. Joseph Kabila, and also the Prime Minister, whom, ironically, I happen to know when he was just a finance, just a little guy that they didn't respect. He was working for the government of Mobutu, and then he all of a sudden became the Prime Minister of the country. So based upon that and other projects that were rigorously supported by Helga, the Schiller Institute, and other organizations in France and what have you, helping us translate some of the reports and what have you. These reports have gone and been spread far and wide in many, many circles, and they are producing great results right now. So hopefully here in the next couple of years, I'll be driving across the Congo Bridge thinking about Hal Cooper and his vision and the strategy that we use to execute those visions, and the reality that things are happening step by step and coming to fruition. So that's just a little bit about me now. Thank you.
I wouldn't mind saying something.
Yeah,
Hal,
why don't-
just
yeah.
real quick. Jeanette and I were lucky enough to travel with Hal at the last conference in February, so it's been almost a year now. He was not in good health, but you couldn't have stopped this guy from going if you wanted to. And so we were very fortunate to be able to be at his side most of the time. Everybody knew him, or if they didn't know him, they wanted to meet him. But one thing personal about Hal that I really appreciate, because it's a rare quality, it's and a very precious quality. Hal had the wisdom of a visionary and the infectious optimism of a child in one person. And so he would transport you into what could be with all of his wisdom, but the possibility of seeing it as a innocent child who wants a better future. And this is I say again, a very rare quality. You don't meet very many people like that, and so it was a real treasure to know him and see his works grow after him around the world.